Yeah, my name is Frans Drummen. I am, as they say, project manager for the DT Grids project at Mine Water Energy. I'm not going to talk about the project. Paul asked me, are you going to talk about DT Grids? I said, no, pas du tout. So lots of people in the room are going to talk about the project. I was asked to tell something about the EU, because the EU is very important, of course, for this project. 60% of the funding comes from the EU, so it's extremely relevant to talk about the environmental strategy and specifically the energy transition strategy of the EU in this, because that's the context of the project, really. But I would like to start with some morning exercise. Don't worry, it will not get sweaty, it's just raising hands. I have, and then I use the clicker. I have a question. Well, the question is, what is energy transition? Is it a technological change of going from one system to another? If you think that's true, do the exercise. Raise your hand, please, now. I see 1, 2. Okay. The second answer is it a fundamental change of how we think about society and how we organize things? If you think that is true, okay, that's quite obvious what the direction is going. Yes, it's actually, as so many things in life, it's a mixture of both, of course. But mainly it is a fundamental change. It's shaking the foundation. But of course, technology is involved. So the answer is somewhere in the middle, more leaning towards fundamental change. But of course, technology is important as well. Because if it would be only technology, why would we change the system? It works perfectly, I think. It's you know, the British describe it very well when they say, let's put the kettle on. Everything works, it's perfect. Why change it? And then I use this one again. So there has to be something else. And in its nature, energy transition is the urge to go from a fossil-based energy system to an energy system based on renewable resources. Together, and that's very important, with the need to reduce the need for energy. Because if we don't need the energy, we don't have to produce it, and you don't get all the trouble involving it. So fundamental change, yes, very complex, multi-actor environment, conflicts of interest, lots of things going on, and it's always nice to find some help with a model. This is a model from Professor Loorbach. He and his colleagues made this. He's from the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. He called it the X-curve. I think it's obvious why. And it's based on the premises that the old system or the old regime is being replaced by a new regime. And it's not a single sequential process. No, it's actually two processes running at the same time. The old system going down, new system coming up. And of course, the model should be very more complicated with lots of arrows in between because there are lots of linkages, but it's more easy to show it in this way. Energy transition sometimes is referred to as a wicked problem, which is a problem which is very difficult to manage, if not impossible. As you can see in the model, two lines starting at different points, and they meet somewhere in the middle, where there's a lot of turbulence and even chaos going on in the middle. And if we group the different stages, you can see optimization, experimentation, etc., we can group them in 4 boxes. The first box, the build-up phase. I think that's the phase where we here being together as a group feel the most comfortable in. It's the phase where the experimental projects happen, where the acceleration happens, and also and that's maybe the most important step of the whole model, the emergence. And emergence in this model means that new networks, new methods, and new corporations take place in various places, and they will find each other and slowly start building up the new system. So it becomes a sort of natural way into the new system. The second box is conversion. So that's where the old system tries to adapt to the new system. And it goes in very slow steps. And if you would skip, for instance, box 1 and start in box 2, so box 1 and 3 are not there, transition will finally happen. It will eventually happen, but much slower than if you don't use box 1. 3 is the phasing out, taking one's losses. It can be speeded up by legislation. Governments say do this and don't do that. Or even by consumers who can say we're going to stop buying certain fossil products, so the process will speed up. And box 4, of course, is the mainstreaming phase where the acceptance of the new system goes towards 100%. And also that can be speeded up by sort of predefining the future. And some people call it, I put a dot on the horizon, and then the future sort of pulls you into its direction. Okay, now we have got a model. That's interesting. Back to reality. What's the angle of attack? What shall we do and when? And two elements, two variables are very important in this field, in this context. It's speed and direction. With what speed should we go and into what direction? And for governments especially, it's very, well, to say at the least, not easy at the moment. Because what's the core business of governments? It's keep the calm, maintain stability, and now they have to facilitate processes which might cause instability and even chaos. So for them, it's finding the balance between two extremes. On the one hand, it's the traditional system saying, like oil company Shell, they say, let's take some time for the conversion. Let's take some time for the transition. Let's take 100 years from going to the old system to the new system. They said so in 2010, so we still got 87 years to go. So eventually it will happen, but very, very slow. And the other extreme is action groups like Extinction Rebellion. They say, well, our government act now or else society will be disrupted heavily by them, I guess. Okay, some of you are thinking, when on earth is he going to talk about the European Union? Yes, that's going to happen now. The EU plays an important role, of course, in the energy transition. And I think the most relevant policy is the European Green Deal. And it's a roadmap. It's a framework program, but it's a roadmap to the reduction of CO2 emissions by 55% in 2030 compared to 1990. That's very ambitious. And in 2050 even, yeah, yes, you can see Europe should be the first climate neutral continent in the world. Yeah, various, not all sectors. I mean, it's not only the energy sector involved, it involves all sectors. The Green Deal is for all sectors. And the Fit for 55 was the first program, the first policy measure in the context of the Green Deal, followed by the Circular Economy Action Plan and the Repower European Union plan. And that came about because because of the external trigger, the Russian aggression in Ukraine. It became obvious that we are over-dependent on energy from outside the EU. So measures had to be taken to overcome that problem. Several other measures are falling under this Green Deal, like the ban on new-built fuel cars, etc., etc. Let's see. Of course, there's money needed for all this, and talking about the budget for the Green Deal, it's a total of 1 trillion euros to be spent in 10 years. I don't use that word every 8 trillion. It's an awful lot of money, but it's not all new money. Half of it comes from regular programs. They just reshuffle priorities, and then they already have 500,000. And it's not that the EU, that all comes from Brussels themselves. It's also co-financed by the member states, and various funds like the Just Transition Fund, Invest EU program, are financing it. I could go on for ages about the whole Green Deal. I want to mention one which is recently approved. It's called the Green Deal Industrial Plan. 4 complementary pillars are on there: more easy legislation, more funding, etc., etc. So making the access to funding more easy for projects. Virtually all energy measures in the Green Deal are focused on saving energy and going from fossil to clean energy. You see all the things that fall under clean energy, and geothermal is also there. And this is, I think, referring to the model we saw before. There's a clear example of acceleration. Because the ambition in 2030 is that 45% of energy generated in the EU has to come from renewable resources. And why acceleration? Because at first it was 40%. But because of Russia doing ugly things, we thought this should be changed, and quite easily it was agreed that it would become 45%. In practice, it's a bit less. I'm looking at Eloi now as being one of the experts. But for some sectors, even a bit more, 49% for heating and cooling, actually. So that's quite relevant to mention. And there's one other thing I would like to show. No, this is the, no, it's not here. Just to put the 1 trillion into perspective, this is the total budget for the EU. It's 2 trillion. It's an awful lot of money. Part of it goes to the Next Generation EU, which is the big recovery fund after COVID. Again, all sectors, 800 billion, 1,200 billion go to the regular long-term budget. This is the annual breakdown, so for anyone who is interested in where it's going to land and in what year, you can read it all afterwards. I'm going to flip. Yeah, one thing I want to mention and for the Green Deal. The Green Deal also has a soul, as the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, called it, and it's called the New European Bauhaus. In one sentence, every time we build something, that building should be sustainable, of course, logic, but also inclusive and especially beautiful. So no more ugly buildings, please. Yeah, I could go on for ages about the Green Deal and all these things. I think the best way, because the Green Deal is a framework program, can you apply for funding in the Green Deal? No, you can't. But it defines how you can, because there are various programs underneath. And I think the best way of showing how, what the possibilities are to get funding in the EU is to show some examples of projects which have been funded in the past periods. I was flipping through the possibilities, through the number of projects, and it's an enormous amount, really. I was surprised myself. In the low carbon corner alone, it's 75,000 projects which have been implemented or are still running today. So that's an enormous amount, and I only picked 5, so don't worry. I'm not going to mention them all. let's go on to the first one. The first one, the veto people absolutely will recognize this one, I guess. It's called Axis. It was funded under the Interreg 5B strand, specifically the North Sea region programs. About Interreg, people here in the room will talk about that later. Why do I start with this? Because it is Interreg, like D2 Grids. And Interreg, the program, touches upon the core of the EU, which is connecting citizens and sharing knowledge, learning from each other. So that's very important. It was 5 countries from the Union who worked together on this one. Yeah, you can read all about it on the slide. Second one. I was involved in this one myself. Why I'm mentioning this? Because this was a combination of 2 programs, which is quite unique. The European Commission wants to promote that because they call it synergy. It strengthens even the single fundings and making it a bigger funding. This was the combination of the UIA program, Urban Innovative Actions, and the LIFE program. Maybe UIA you don't know, but LIFE, everybody heard of that, I think. It has been there for a while. It's about the CO2 reduction by reusing materials from demolishing a high-rise building on site. So nothing went out, nothing came in. So the old materials stayed. They tried to make new houses, which they did. They tried to do it 100%, but it was impossible because you don't reuse asbestos and things like that. So they came on a percentage of 90% reuse and combining it with a closed water cycle, using all kinds of water, rainwater, toilet water even. So that's very, very unique. Why mentioning it? Another reason is that it's European funded. But it's a cooperation in one country. So it's nationally based. The partners come from one country, but they can get European funding for that. And of course, there's a follow-up program, European Urban Initiative, which even has more possibilities. I was asked to speed up. Well, this is an example of also an EU program, but it's a regional program. You can go around the corner to apply for funding. Different language because it's regional, it's a different country, it's France in this respect. And the next one, I've been asked to speed up and speed up. Yes, acceleration, it fits in the model, so that's good. This is Germany. Again, regional program, application desk around the corner, and it's a passive house, very interesting. I don't know if you heard that phrase already. And the last one I want to mention is called HACS. It's from the Horizon program. And I do want to say something about that. Horizon is the only program, the Horizon Europe, so the follow-up of this one, is the only program where the UK can get direct funding. So they didn't leave us completely. They are still with us, and thank God for that. So that's good. Yeah, the closing up sentence, I'm going to pick out one and that one. Yes, if you have a good idea, if you can build a solid partnership around it, please consider doing European funding. EU has definitely got an added value to all those projects. But please don't step in it just because there is funding. Step in it because you can really make and want to make a contribution to making Europe a much greener place. Let's green up Europe. Thank you.
I'm Eloi from Euroheat and Power. I don't know if you are familiar with Euroheat and Power. We are the associations uniting the district heating sector in Europe. So we are the forum and voice of the sector. So our members are national associations like FEDEN in France, and we also have companies and industries manufacturing, all the stuff you need to operate a heating network. So today I'll share some thoughts with you in a limited amount of time on the role of district heating to address climate and energy challenges. And I think France is a perfect place to speak about the potential, the future role of district heating. Back in November, I watched it online, the press conference of our colleagues from FEDEN and Amorce when they presented the new enquête 2022. And they presented some impressive figures. I mean, in France, in the last 10 years, district heating has grown solidly. CO2 content of systems have been cut by 2. So I don't know if everybody knows that France is in the top 5 when it comes to district heating in Europe. So there are really some interesting developments here. Well, this conference is taking place in a period of energy crisis. So the winter is behind us. But it's likely that energy will come back really high in the news when Europe prepares for the next heating season. And the current crisis, you can see here the picture, like all security of supply crisis, is in reality a crisis of the heat market. At EU level, half of energy goes to heating, and the heating sector is still very much a stronghold of fossil fuels, which make over 2/3 of the market. And over the past months, we have seen that the countries hit the most by the energy crisis are those which have not done enough to transform the heat market. I'm looking at you, but thinking UK, but I'm listening to BBC every morning, and there's been really a lot in the news. And should it be heat or eat? Okay. And on this, actually, on this issue, the enquête from FEDEN and Amorce showed really well that efficient district heating fueled with renewables, with waste heat, is the best way to protect customers from volatile prices of fossil fuels while developing climate-friendly solutions for our cities. On the policy context, well, I will only give you a snapshot of new legislation, so I'm not gonna go into details. I think this is not our purpose today. Well, Frans, you mentioned it, so the Fit for 55 measures presented by the Commission in 2021 is the latest package presented to accelerate the energy transition and realize the Green Deal. So the package set out a renewable target by 2032. Actually, the figures agreed by co-legislators 2 weeks ago is a 42.5 target of share of renewable energy by the horizon 2030. The package also set out targets in terms of energy efficiency and CO2 emission reductions, including from the building sector, with the development of a dedicated instrument under the form of a trading scheme. The package is obviously highly relevant for our discussions, as it will propose a target to increase the share of renewable and waste heat and provisions to support the development of district heating. In the package, for instance, you will find provision that will mandate cities to do some heat plannings. So all cities above 45,000 inhabitants in Europe will have to do heat planning. This is good news. More recently, the Commission put forward in May 2022 the Repower EU proposal, which is the EU response to the gas crisis and aims at advancing the energy transition with plans to facilitate funding and development of renewable projects. In this big picture, district heating obviously fits very well to increase security of supply, to provide climate-friendly energy supplies, and to bring affordable energy in cities where demands are located. So first, I should say that we see a big potential for district heating to grow. So today, the market share at European level is around 12%. So 60 million citizens in Europe are supplied with district heating. There are around 15,000 networks, but more important, we have 80 million citizens who live in a city where you have at least one district heating network. So it points out the potential for quick expansion, and we know that a lot can be done in 2 to 5 years. I mean, we have examples of new networks of conversion from fossil to biomass, extension of networks that can be achieved within this time frame. I'll give 2 examples of countries which are successful. Austria, so district heating sales have increased by factor 3 since 1990, 20% in the last 10 years. 700,000 buildings equivalent are expected to be connected by 2040 to reach a total of 2.1 million buildings. I was looking into figures, and I was surprised by the success of district heating in Switzerland. There is high growth, 10% of district heating sales last year. So they are really good examples. I'm talking here of new markets, but incremental growth is also happening in mature markets. So Denmark has now a plan to further expand district heating to replace the remaining 400,000 gas boilers they still have. District heating and renewable, well, this is a perfect combination. I think I don't need to convince here. I mean, if you check the Eurostat figures, you can see it's quite easy to see the correlation between a high share of renewable heat and high penetration of district heating. I think of maybe the great example is Iceland, but think of Nordics, or I think also of France. I think is also a good example. So the share of renewable and waste heat in the fuel mix of district heating in Europe, it's over 40%. So it's much higher than the share of renewable on the heat market, which is around 23%. Tapping the waste heat potential, well, in terms of future resources, waste heat needs to be further developed. Although well developed on some markets, the share remains far from the potential. The Heat Map Europe highlighted strong potential for waste heat. According to the study, it could meet 25% of district heating supplies by the horizon 2050. I could also refer you to another project, the Reuse Heat project, which looked into the potential for urban waste heat. So think of heat from wastewater treatment plants, data centers, service sector buildings, residential buildings, and also there they identified a very high potential for all these sources. So basically, this new urban waste heat could meet 14% of the total European demand for heating and preparation of hot tap water. A last point I will mention is system integration, and that's another important debate, another important element in all these discussions. The idea of district heating as a way to actually integrate the energy systems to add efficiency to different sectors. And here you know that the decarbonization pathways of the EU are betting very much on the electrification of many usages, but in this picture, the electrification of all things, actually thermal systems running on CHP, on renewables, on waste heat have a high relevance. They can provide support to the electricity grid by addressing big demands and integrating more renewable power for the purpose of heating. And this way they can also support the decarbonization and the electrification of other sectors deemed difficult to decarbonize. So there is a lot of synergies to be exploited. And Stephanie, you mentioned cooling, and what is true, of course, for heating and district heating is also true for district cooling networks. These systems can offload the last kilometer of the grid with smart production based on free cooling, waste heat and efficient solutions. And not far from here in the center of Paris, I think we have a really great example. Voila, so as a conclusion, well, the current energy crisis, I think, is a wake-up call for many countries which have not done enough to transform the heat market. I think there has been a bit of complacency. It's clearly time to move forward faster and for Europe to put its money where its mouth is. So Frans, you were mentioning the UK, but I like this quote from Churchill that we should never let a good crisis go to waste. So I think it's time to move quicker. The energy transition can take different paths, but in all cases, well, it will imply a deep transformation of the heat market as we know it today in most countries, with a higher integration of the energy system and better synergies between efficiency and energy sources and sectors. And I think this is really well illustrated by all the projects under D2 grids. And the great news I mean, considering this situation, is that we have the tools, we have the know-how to address the challenge. And maybe a last thought, it's not always mentioned, but there is European leadership on all these solutions to develop sustainable urban heating. All the leading utilities, the companies producing the pipes, the software, the meters, the substations, I mean, all these companies are European. So investing in district heating, it's also developing strong and resilient territories, and it's also helping to consolidate European industrial leadership. So thank you. And well, I'm looking forward to discussions, and if you have any questions, I'm not sure we have the time right now, Emilia, but please, well, I will... Sorry? Yeah, well, yeah. I think I will go quick on this one. It's a bit of a commercial for... sorry. for our Congress. So if you want to continue the conversation, please come to Torino on 23rd and 24th of May. It's something I owe to our communications team. So.
Yes. Okay.